Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Better Cocktails at Home. I'm Brian Johnson, and we're here in the Quarterdeck Club, our home bar, and we are kicking off an all-new theme for the month of July. So July 4th is the United States, it's Independence Day, and so we kind of thought doing a theme of cocktails around sort of drinks that they had around colonial America in those times. So we're talking 1700s, mid 1700s, late 1700s, all in an era. So I want to just kind of do something different, and I'm really excited about this theme because I think it's really cool to go back in time, because I think cocktails can really do that well, is take you back into time and see what people were drinking and just the flavors that were going on, which are really complex. So the first thing we're going to make in this episode is called Cherry Bounce. So Cherry Bounce it's kind of like a cordial liqueur, sort of. And when the recipe that we're following was found in Martha Washington's papers, and it was not in her handwriting, so maybe somebody wrote it down for her, or they maybe gave it to her, the recipe. But George Washington himself was known to really enjoy Cherry Bounce. And so that's the recipe we're kind of following. And it's, as with most old recipes, it's not really that complete, and so it kind of gives you some ideas, but we're kind of left to interpret ourselves quite a bit. So that's kind of what we're doing. So we're going to start making it, and we've done a lot of the work in advance because a lot of it is very time consuming, but we're going to kind of finish it off here, and then we'll taste it and that sort of thing. So the first thing that we did was we collected a bunch of cherries. So these are the cherries that we collected this time for this. These are I think pie cherries. That's kind of what they're known around where I live. They're smaller, they're not as sweet. So in her original recipe, it calls for sour cherries or a Morrella cherry. Sour cherries are actually kind of difficult to find at retail. Usually you might find just random trees somewhere or like kind of a grove of them. These were probably the closest I could kind of find to that. And so that's what I'm using. And they're small, they don't use a lot of juice, but I was trying to approximate the best I could with what I could find. So we went out and collected 3 pounds of these pie cherries of unknown variety. Hello, so we're here in a cherry tree grove. People call these pie cherries. I think these are kind of what's called sour cherries. They're actually kind of hard to find in stores. But I think they're kind of smaller. They're not super sweet, so I think these are kind of the sour cherries, the best we're going to find for this experiment. But yeah, so we're just out here picking a few, get us going, and yeah, we're going to use these in our Cherry Bounce recipe. And then we juice them. Her original recipe calls for 20 pounds, but that would have taken forever to pit and juice and everything else. And it took us a while for 3 pounds. So before you do this, make sure you know what you're getting into. So we went through that whole process. We yielded about 2 cups of juice. And so to that, I'm going to add some brandy, is what's called for in the original recipe. As we know, cognac is a brandy. So I'm going to use the Pierre Ferrand. It's a little higher proof, so I want it to stand up. And I'm doing it's not exact in the recipe, so I'm going to do equal parts here. So about 2 cups of cherry juice and 2 cups of cognac in this case. So there's 1. And there's 2. All right, so that's kind of the component there. So now at this point, I'm going to strain this because I've got some of the pulp from the cherries. I tried to sort of, as I was juicing them, get as much as I could, but there's still a lot left. So I'm going to kind of restrain this. And do the best I can to kind of get as much of just pure liquid. It's very pulpy. I'm going to use a spoon to try to press some of this, but this stuff is delicious. It smells really good. And I see some recipes, people make it, when they do make it, they'll make it with sometimes whiskey. I'm going to try to stick as true to the original recipe as possible. All right, so we've got that now. So at this point, the recipe calls for adding white sugar. So because all cherries are different and everything else, I mean, it says to sugar to taste, right? So that's where you kind of have to go a little bit on your own here. So we're going to start with tasting it. And I'm gonna add a little sugar. I'm not gonna add a ton though. So to this, which is, we have about, I don't know, maybe 3.5 cups in here or so. I'm probably gonna do maybe about an ounce, or maybe 1.5 ounces of sugar, just to kind of sweeten it a little bit. Kind of think of this as like a pre-batch cocktail, right? You're almost making this in advance. All right, so we're kind of stir that a little bit. Of course, we can taste as we go. And I don't, if you've watched our show, you know I don't skew super sweet. So I'm probably going to be a little bit on the tart side of this. You know, it's the recipe, as the recipe says, add sugar to taste. All right, we're going to call that good there. Now at this point, I'm going to put it in this jar that I'm going to store it in, because the recipe calls to have it sort of sit for a few weeks to kind of all the flavors congeal and sort of meld together. So let's see how this goes. Going to help it a little bit. Mind you, I'm just going to be the only one eating this, so we're drinking it, which is why I'm using my finger for this. We're almost there. Okay. All right, so we've got that. So now we've got a really well strained liquid here. So we're, at this point, we've got sugar, we've got cognac / brandy, and we've got cherry juice. So now we're going to add some of the spice components. So the original recipe calls for kind of equal parts. So I'm going to do For this small amount, I'm going to do kind of a smaller cinnamon stick. And so I'm just going to drop this in here. And then it also calls for part of a piece of nutmeg. All right, here it is. I found it. So much for being prepared in advance. And rather than kind of grate it, I'm just going to cut some little chunks of it, because grating just releases a ton of flavor, like super fast. And then a few cloves. So I'm going to do probably like 3 cloves in there. Right, just a little bit of flavor to help it out. And then kind of the final thing she calls for in the recipe, whether she wrote it or not, but somebody did. I have some of the pits. So I'm just going to do a few of these, not very many, maybe like 4 or 5. And she calls to kind of break them up a little bit, so break those up. And we'll put those in there. All right, so that is everything we're going to put in this cherry bounce. So now we're going to seal it up, give it a good shake before we put it away. But that is what's going to be in the fridge for a few weeks as the flavors meld. But because we like instant results and it's 2021, I'm just going to do a little sip test here, just to kind of see where we're at right now before I... Right now it's very cherry and brandy. Obviously I just stuck the spices and they're not really going to have a chance to kind of fuse yet. I think over time it's kind of give it just a nice little depth of flavor. And I think it's going to turn out really, really nice. So we're going to let this sit for about a month or so, and then we'll check in with it again and see how it tastes. But yeah, so that's cherry bounce and how we interpret it from the recipe found in Martha Washington's papers. There's probably a lot of different ways you can interpret it, and you could use different cherries that have different flavors to it. So really kind of think of it as a guide, really. Like, hey, here's this thing. It's, cherry juice, brandy, cognac, some spices, a little bit of sugar, right? Like, kind of that's the kind of template you're working off of, and take that and make something cool. But I think it's really exciting to be able to go back in time and just see what people were making and taste it, something similar in flavor-wise. So I thank you so much for watching Bitter Cocktails at Home, and I hope to see you on our next episodes featuring more colonial area cocktails.